Ed Wright is 46 years old, and he's going off to college on a scholarship. Perhaps he doesn't look like the typical scholar, but then it's not a typical college he's going to.
A really good trip, eh?
Okay.
We're expecting 80%.
I'm a storesman at the plant, and I make about, roughly $95 a week for a 40-hour week. While it's a good, secure job, and the company has great prospects for the future, at the same time, the job becomes very routine and boring, and perhaps this is what prompted me to become more and more interested in union work, and it's more full than working the plant. I was elected on the bargaining committee, and I was on the bargaining committee for about 8 years.
All right, fellas. The Local 112 United Auto Workers. Here, Brother Firth is to advise you that Brother Edward Wright of your local has been selected by the Selection Committee of the Labour College of Canada. The Canadian office of the United Auto Workers will be responsible for his expenses. Brother Wright has been assigned to the second class, which begins May 31st and ends on July the 23rd. Fraternally yours, Max Swerdlow, Register of the Labour College.
Well, Brother Chairman, I want to tell you thanks very much from me and from my family, and I'm sure that I'll uphold the dignity of Local 112 and carry on in the footsteps of Brother Dias, who was at the school last year.
The University of Montreal sits on a hilltop 350 miles from Ed's home in Toronto. Now it's summer vacation, and the regular students are away. For the next 8 weeks, the campus belongs to very different people. The new tenants are a group of Canadian and overseas trade unionists. With the help of McGill University and the University of Montreal, they've set up a summer school for themselves. It's called Labour College. So far, it has few traditions, for it began in 1963. But in this time, it has worked so well that it has become known as one of the most important projects of the Canadian Labour Congress. Ed left school 30 years ago, insufficiently educated by today's standards. In the past, he's not had much use for universities and academics, but there is a key at the desk in his name, and it's quite an honor that it's there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
You have a reservation for James Whitaker, Cornwall? Well, I guess I really got the idea of going to Labour College from talking to Jerry Dias, and he was really enthusiastic about the whole situation, the value it had been to him. And I just thought, well, maybe I better invite him over to the house and see what he could tell me about the school and what the problems were.
The Labour College is one of the best things that ever happened to the labour movement in recent years. And if you can get a break to go, I think that you should take it. I also believe that if you do get a chance to go there, you have to, it's a pretty tough job. You have to stick very hard to the schedule. And sometimes it means that you have to study until about 4 o'clock in the morning.
We often have to work under pressure. An exam.
We got there about, say, 5:30, and then the reception was for 7 o'clock. See, so there was only a short hour and a half of getting cleaned up, and then right down to the reception.
Sisters and brothers, friends, ladies and gentlemen, I assure you it is with excitement and a great deal of pleasure that I open this third term of the Labour College of Canada.
Oh, I suppose there were 65 or 70 Colombo Plan students. They're from Hong Kong and Singapore and Indonesia and many of the African countries and all the islands in the Caribbean. Well, I felt mostly they came from the same sort of level and background that I came from, and they were faced with pretty well the same difficulties, with only a change in perhaps area as far as the country went. Some of them were quite a bit younger than I am and had a better chance to remember what had gone on in school.
But let me just say this to you, that you will find these 8 weeks perhaps the hardest and most difficult weeks of your life. Ladies and gentlemen, sisters and brothers, it is my...
Max Swerdlow then introduced Professor Martin, who was the principal, the first full-time principal of the Labor College.
The primary aim of the college is to provide instruction in the social sciences which will help present and future union leaders to understand the functioning of modern society in its most important aspects: economics, political, sociological, and historical. Because it is precisely the extent of the labor leaders' knowledge of social problems and the methods of solving them that determines the ability of the labor movement to attain its objectives.
My name is Maxwell Flood, and I am going to teach you sociology.
My name, as you can see, is Peter Blakey. The course that we'll be doing together this summer is an economic history course.
I'm going to give a series of lectures through the next 8 weeks on political science, introduction to politics, introduction to government.
The first thing I must do is to situate economics among all the other subjects which you will study at the college.
This particular group this morning is the group on trade unionism and the trade union subjects. And I would like to point out to you that there are some substantial differences as to the courses that you're going to have here. You have altogether 5 types of courses. 4 of them, as you know, are what we will describe as academic courses. The 5th is a trade union course. Now, the 4 academic courses, as the title suggests, will be given to you by university professors, each one specializing in his particular subject.
I'd never come in contact with any professors or any university teachers at any time.
Ont été entraînés dans cette crise tous les grands pays occidentaux, tous les grands pays à l'intérieur du système capitaliste.
Well, being in Montreal really brought the bilingual problem right up to your nose, as it were, because we don't sort of run into that problem in the Toronto area. And then when you go to Montreal, you almost seem to go to another world or a different country because of the difficulty of communication.
La Russie ne commerçait presque pas.
Just sign underneath here.
They handed us a time study sheet where they expected us to be 4 hours on Monday and 4 hours on Tuesday. And it all boiled down to about 32 hours in the classroom a week. And then they said they fully expect us to do another 30, 35 hours reading, study, and review. It turned out, of course, that instead of 4 hours on Monday, they'd be wind up about 6 because there'd be another notice posted on the board on the Friday afternoon before you left of another class or a supplementary or a tutorial or whatever. And I'm not the best, you know, because I don't plug. I guess psychologically they were way ahead of us because if you look up the hill, it looks a long way to climb. But if you got an extra couple hours a day and a couple of days' notice on it, you kind of wouldn't mind it.
You remember we were talking about the bank wiring group, which comprised 3 work groups. And yet, after the sociological study was done, we found out that the informal organization of the workers actually comprised 2 cliques. They had, therefore...
I hadn't any idea of sociology at all. Perhaps I'd heard of the word, but the word didn't ring any bells with me at all. And the professor's talking to you about norms and concepts, and this is the first guy that we really rubbed against when we came here. And sometimes you build a little resentment to this because he's got the knowledge and you haven't got the knowledge, and the terms he's using you should know and you don't know, and he overcame this after. The sociology in my book is okay, but there's gaps in it. They only advance the subject so far, and there's no conclusion. They all sort of seem to be wondering whether they're going to be a science someday or not, or whether somebody's going to look up to them to tell them that they're a scientist, you know? They do.
Norms were not known to company officials until after the research.
Because the British government was prepared to foot the bill.
History of Economics with Blakey.
The Canadian commercial interests acquiesced, and the Rideau Canal was built.
He described himself right away, told us right away what he was. We knew he was a professional man right away, and we knew that here was somebody you had to look up to and be respectful of, because he had the background and knowledge. He's a big boy, and he walks with the big boy sort of deal, you know?
But
the mainland, like bridge, called the Kacha Bridge.
That's where you have all the central government business and what type of
That's right.
It was quite a change in some of the students after the first few days, and after the newness of Montreal wore off, then you could see many of them buckle right down and take advantage of perhaps the best opportunity they've had to learn for years.
Well, I don't understand exactly what Martin was telling us about this morning. I didn't put the prices in there. Is this where you're supposed to put prices?
Yeah,
This is
your
prices, isn't it?
prices, and this is the amount of pounds of butter. You see, you work from zero both ways.
Mm-hmm.
And as your price goes up, your demand is less.
26th of July for a week, and then...
The first week is really rough and a real trying period of adjustment. But after that week, you kind of look forward more every day to what you're going to find out or learn or see the next day.
The trouble with the system as it stands is that society, of course, is dynamic and expanding, whereas the system is based on a rigid separation of powers between the executive and the legislature, where we have seen that this is a major difference between the presidential system on the one hand and the parliamentary system in Canada and Britain on the other hand.
Kuntz is a Hungarian, and most of us just couldn't get the idea what he was saying in his particular choice of words. And lots of times, if you don't get the opportunity to look at people when they're talking to you, you can't really write down what they're saying. And if you take the time to look, then you're not writing. So at least I was anyway. I was a couple hours behind the guy right from the start. But I wouldn't say that there's anything that he did. It was a necessity for us to learn how to read and how to write again, or how to listen and how to write.
What is difficult and what is causing the problem is not so much separation of power itself, but the lack of coordination between the executive and the legislature.
And he said, well, I would rather promise another 20 years a national health plan than have a communistic program rammed down my throat. In other words, Medicare, in his opinion, and he's a liberal MP, was interpreted as communistic. Well, how ludicrous can you get?
There's hardly a country today that has any working class that hasn't got some social legislation. It takes time to develop it over the years. It's costly, you see. But it comes. They have it in India. They've had it for quite a long time. You've got a big working class in India.
How far behind us are they, do you think, relatively speaking?
Well, I don't know. The majority of the Indian people are still on the land, you see. And the kind of social security you would have for farmers or peasants is a much different kind than we'll be discussing here today. Social legislation, or social security legislation, came into being not so much to help the poor, but to keep the poor from getting a little on the rebellious side. Now, this is very subversive. We never say that, except privately in a closed meeting like this. The first person to introduce social legislation wasn't a socialist or a communist. It was Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor of Prussia.
Okay.
You see.
Easy on the onions.
Get your food and keep moving.
one of the social events of the term. All the students gathered on a Saturday morning at 9 or 10 o'clock and went to Max Swerdlow's cottage for the day. And it kind of made you feel a little homesick. I mean, you were kind of happy to be with all these people, but at the same time, I guess you might have been more happy if there were some of your own folks with you. Max is the real down-to-earth Canadian Labour Congress type leadership, readily approachable.
Well, of course, the college is not in the financial business, and it is not designed to make money. Last year, we took in about $122,000, but 85% of this amount came from the labor movement. In some cases, local unions have contributed as little as $5, and in some cases, as a matter of fact, your own organization, as much as $1,000 or $2,000. We do not go outside of the labor movement or the governments for our finances. We figure that it costs roughly between $500 and $700 per student to operate the college. And we take in, as you know, $175 registration fee, so that's easy to figure out.
You must take into consideration all the aspects, and we can measure the output. But how can you measure the machines? How many what?
And the way Martin put it across, lightly and with lots of respect and lots of ideas, you always knew he was the boss and he could make a joke about the deal. Or describe it in his own inimitable fashion, and then after that was over, we were right back on the score again. He's a real bright one.
1,000th of a tractor, and a razor would be worth 1,000,000th of a tractor.
People who work for a living through jobs, who rely on an employer to give them employment, and where you have a situation where the employer in turn relies on a market to sell goods, do not have the kind of security that a farmer ordinarily has who works on the land. They are dependent on work, and work is not always available, and this is, as you know from your own experience, not an academic statement at all. This is something you must be familiar with. It's in your own bones, in your own experience.
Yes, I would like to know whether the management was more pleased after the sociologist had made his experiment or otherwise.
Professor, I would like to ask a question on the social interaction in the bank wiring group.
When you talk of crisis power of the press,
yes.
What do you mean really in the ordinary language?
Mr. Flood, it's difficult for me to understand why sociologists use such an old study, which, as I understand it, was done in the 1930s. Haven't there been any other studies since then?
Well, that's a very good question. Perhaps I could answer it this way. The law of gravity was established a long time ago, but we still talk about it because there was some revolutionary finding there. And in the bank wiring group, you had...
As far as labor colleges, I'm finished. We got one exam tomorrow, and right, kind of pressure the past couple of days, and Sunday and Saturday and that sort of thing. But apart from that, what we're looking forward to is completing tomorrow.
Aren't you fortunate that because of your presence at the college, you were discovered? And he said, I am more fortunate because of my presence at the college, I discovered myself. To me, this statement epitomizes the whole idea of an institution of this kind. It is what you find in yourselves. And perhaps, as some of you have said, doors have been opened, windows have been opened. If the college has done nothing else but given you the opportunity of finding yourselves, then I think the college is indeed a worthwhile institution.
As they started handing out the certificates, then the attention mounts as each one gets eliminated. Then you begin to wonder whether one of your friends get great distinction, and you wonder to yourself, I wonder how he rated that. This year, the administration of the college were quite happy with the standards as compared to the previous 2 years' standard, but this was the first year that they took a real hard look of everybody, and in fact, there were 4 failures.
History, sociology, and political science. Theory and practice of trade unionism. Holy man. You left him.
Hey, pretty good, hey?
You left him.
Pretty good for an old guy. I can't see that it's of immediate value. But in other times, I can see that it gives you a broader understanding of people. And in the trade union movement, that's all you're dealing with, is people. And if you're given a hasty judgment, and I guess we all are, it may control some of that speed. Finding a guy and judging him right on the spot instead of saying, well, we'll talk about it next week. Because I think that's all education will do for you anyway. Any which way you look at it.
In union locals across Canada, in Montreal, in Winnipeg, in Vancouver, trade unionists are returning from Labor College with an expanded understanding of the world in which they work, and with new ideas and new ways to meet the businessmen whose future they share.
The social reality is very complex and very difficult to apprehend. And consequently, our minds being not too strong and the sciences not too developed, it turns up that to make the problem more manageable, we have broken this big subject into various aspects.